As I think about it, I realize more and more than ever that what we need to do is just know who and what we are. See, the problem is that we know that there's something more, but we don't see it manifesting, so we don't know what to do. We don't know how to get it. And I remember going to God one day when I left the department. I was crying out because I felt like there was more in me than what I was seeing. And so when I started my journey of finding me, I tried almost everything. I knew that there was something more. I just wasn't seeing it manifest, and I was getting frustrated. I knew that there was something that was to be about me that I just wasn't seeing. I listened to motivational speaker from motivational speaker. I asked for advice from advice. And yes, I was getting motivated and people were giving me advice. I mean, I even emulated some of the ones that I admired, thinking that that was what I was supposed to be doing, that that's what God wanted from me, that was that more. And I realized that all I was doing was experimenting and trying to find myself. So when I realized that the only way that I was going to access and learn to utilize that bottled power that was in me was to stop living life as a simple inquiry. I remember talking to a friend of mine on Zoom. He was a law enforcement officer like I was, and when he was talking to me, he did one thing that everybody needs a friend like that for, and that was that he didn't hold back. I told him what I was going through in life and the struggles that I was facing and enduring, and he said one simple thing to me. He looked at me in my eyes and said, "Yo, Mike, where did that command voice go that they taught you to carry when you were in the academy?" He said, "The problem is that when you got injured and you left the department, you left your command voice back there." And at that point, things began to become real and they began to gel for me. I instantly began to remember things that I had endured as a law enforcement officer, that no quit mentality that I had as a law enforcement officer. I remembered the stories that I used to tell my son about. Well, I mean, the ones that I felt safe that telling him, that I felt safe for him to know. I began to think about a situation in particular that had happened when I was a child, and I began to tell my friend about this situation. See, when I was a child, I remember picking up my brother from school one day, and he seemed to have a lot on his mind, like there was a lot bothering him. And he began to tell me about a situation where these older kids were picking on him. I remember walking him home from school that day, and all I could think about was that something had to be done, that this wasn't going to happen to my brother. So the next day after school, after going to find these kids who at that particular point were actually bragging about picking on some little kid, this little kid who happened to be my brother. A long story short, I whooped up on each and every one of these kids, and I think there were about 3 of them to be exact. But it was that moment in time that I didn't think about the consequences or what could have even happened to me. I just knew something had to be done. So after that, I went and picked up my little brother and I took him home. I don't even remember telling my brother or my family what I did that day. And immediately after telling my friend that story, he looked at me again and he said, "Yo, so what happened to the fight?" It was then that I began to realize that it was probably that moment in time that I began to build up that true fight that was in me. See, I had remembered that there was one other time when I was a kid, when I was in elementary school, that I had been beat up, I had been jumped. And I remember stating that that would never happen to me again, that I would never lose again. To be honest with you, I didn't. But the rest of my life was spent with that mentality. So when my friend asked me, where did the fight go? I tell you, that simple question hit me hard. And I began to ask myself, where did the fight go? And I began to think about the fact that the only way that I was going to stop experimenting through life was to find that authentic me. You must find and utilize that authentic you. And you must stay true to who you are. And to be authentic, you must simply separate yourself from the pack. The rest of it, the thing is that somewhere I seemed that I had dropped the ball. I had attempted to do something or be someone that I wasn't. And because of that, I failed and I wasn't being my authentic self. So let me tell you something. See, it's the fact that when you're too busy trying to be someone else, it's when you are too busy trying to do what you weren't designed to do in the first place that you're simply experimenting. So let me tell you what we need to do. We need to be authentic and we need to stop experimenting. We need to find ourselves and love who we truly are. We need to be comfortable with who we are. And for me, it was the moment that I accepted who I was and utilized what I was that authentic fire began to become recognized in others. I began to realize that I'm the best me, that I'm number one, and not because of what the world told me or because of what someone else might have told me, but because that's who I am. I was authentic because I'm no longer experimenting with the creation that I am. And I'm not perfect. I mean, I fail a lot, but guess what? At least I can stand up and look at you in the face and say that I tried. And that's what a man does. You need to be the authentic man that doesn't maybe always succeed, but stands up when he fails and is able to admit that failure. He then uses the failure as fuel to continue and move on. The problem is that too many of us are afraid of failure or failing again, that we can't use it as fuel, but we curl up in a ball. But for me, I went ahead and looked at it and said, next chapter, that's what you need to do. See, a real man doesn't fail and falter. He doesn't immediately curl up in a ball and take the beating. Let me tell you a story. I remember one day that my son was little young boy in elementary school, and he came home one day and we were talking, and he told me about an assembly that he had at school. He told me that they told him that if someone was beating up on him, that he was to drop immediately and curl up in a ball, and that he couldn't respond or fight back until he was kicked in the head like 4 or 5 times. And I'm going to be honest with you, I wasn't having that. I was mortified. And as a father, I couldn't imagine that even happening. So what I told my son is that if he ever got hit or someone was fighting him, that he would end it right then and there, that he would deal with it and I would deal with the aftermath later. But the fact is that he would not get beat up and almost crippled or worse, dead because of someone else's actions or their example of what they wanted to do. And that's not what we need to do as we get older as men. We don't just need to take the words of someone else and just curl up in a ball and take it. I mean, I couldn't believe some of the things that came out of the school system at that point in time. Anyway, I digress, because if I think about it, I'm on a rabbit trail and don't even remember where I was going with that. But yeah, I do remember. Don't just curl up in a ball when the trials and tribulations seem to get heavier and heavier. And I'm not telling you that when the tough gets tougher, that violence is the key. But the fact is that you don't give up. You fight. And that it's easier to do that when you know who you are, when you know your purpose and you know what it is that you're fighting for. But it's when you're searching and experimenting, it's at this point when you don't know what you are fighting for that things get harder and harder, that frustration builds up. The fact is that God created you to be his masterpiece. And what a masterpiece is an artist's greatest piece of work. God created you to be his greatest piece of work. And the enemy's biggest ploy is confusion, trying to get God's creation to experiment, to not know who and what they are. Because when they do not know who and what they are, fear sets in and their frustration builds. So you must know who you are. Even more important, you must know whose you are. Men, your identity is key. It's foundational. And it's when you do not know who and what you are that the rest of the world is truly in trouble. We are in a global crisis that leads to a foundational breaking in the spirit. So find your authentic self and be the best version of you that you can possibly be. Stay true to yourself. An original is so much more worth than a copy. You need to stop experimenting and adjusting to the world. Matter of fact, be yourself and make the world adjust. Matter of fact, just be yourself and make the world adjust to you. Yo, I'm PD, the identity strategist. And one thing that I know, one thing that I realize more than ever is that we're enduring a global pandemic. One in which it's an identity crisis where, because of the world's confusion, we just don't know who and what we are anymore. Men don't know how to react or how to respond or don't know their purpose. Well, we need to find our true purpose, and we need to realize who and whose we are. Well, I pray you got a lot out of this, and these last few minutes that I spent with you. Well, want more? Hit the subscribe button. But go a step farther and hit the little bell in the corner so that you can be notified that new content is dropping. Now, one thing that I do know is that the only way we're going to reach the masses is to share the message. So be a blessing and share this message with someone that needs to hear this today. God bless. This is PD, and I'm out.